You hear the name Chariots of Fire, and you probably think of power, glory, maybe that iconic slow-motion running scene. But what if I told you the true origin of that famous movie title has pretty much nothing to do with running and everything to do with a mysterious vision of fiery vehicles descending from the heavens? Today, we're going to follow a trail that leads from Hollywood through classic poetry and deep into one of the Bible's most puzzling passages. So, you've almost certainly heard of the 1981 film Chariots of Fire. It's this incredible true story about two British runners at the 1924 Olympics, and it zeroes in on Eric Liddell, a devout Scottish missionary. His faith was so unshakable that he actually chose to skip a race held on a Sunday, putting his beliefs above any shot at Olympic glory. It's a story all about human drive, powered by something divine.
But that brings us to the big question, right? The movie's about running and faith and conviction. It's not literally about chariots, so what's the deal? Why that specific title? Where does it come from?
Well, the answer isn't hiding in the film's script. To find it, we've got to trace the inspiration back through time. And our first stop on this trail is a very famous British hymn.
Okay, so check this out. The movie's title was pulled directly from a line in the iconic British hymn, Jerusalem. But that hymn? It's actually an adaptation of a poem by the visionary artist and writer William Blake. You might know him from Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright.
And deep inside that poem, which later became the hymn Jerusalem, we find our phrase, "Bring me my chariot of fire." The filmmakers just grabbed that powerful, mystical line and boom, a legendary movie title was born. But our investigation is just getting warmed up.
So that just begs another question, right? What in the world inspired William Blake to write about a chariot of fire? Well, it turns out he was pulling from a source that's even more ancient and, honestly, way more profound. Blake's poem, which starts with the line, "and did those feet in ancient time," is all about this vision of building a divine Jerusalem right there in England. And his whole idea for this heavenly city? He got it directly from the Bible's final book, the Book of Revelation. And he was super specific about it. Blake was drawing from two key passages, one that promises a new Jerusalem to the faithful, and another that describes a vision of that holy city literally descending from heaven. So this links the whole chariot of fire idea not just to some vehicle, but to this powerful biblical image of a divine arrival.
And, this whole chariot motif is surprisingly common. In fact, there's another incredibly famous song that shares this exact theme, but it gets its inspiration from a completely different biblical story.
I mean, you've definitely heard Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. It's one of the most well-known African-American spirituals. It came out of the experience of slavery in the United States, and it's this incredibly powerful song of hope for freedom and deliverance, a call to be carried home to a better place.
So, here we are. We've got two famous chariot songs with two totally different origins. Blake's Chariot of Fire is all tied up in this future vision of a new Jerusalem from Revelation. But Swing Low, Sweet Chariot? That one's referencing a much older story from the Old Testament, the day the prophet Elijah was supposedly taken straight up into heaven without ever dying.
Okay, so this is where our little investigation takes a really fascinating turn. What if these ancient descriptions of chariots and even clouds weren't just poetic metaphors? What if the authors were trying to describe something they actually witnessed using the only words they had available to them?
Let's look at the actual passage about Elijah. It reads like a full-on, supernatural, mythical event. A chariot of fire with horses of fire just shows up out of nowhere and sweeps him away in a whirlwind. This is the image we see in so much religious art. But let's break down the language here for a sec. The Hebrew root word that gets translated as chariot is rakab, and it just means to ride, or more broadly, a vehicle of transport. It's a generic term. Think about how we use the word car today. It came from carriage, and the primary engine of their time was the horse, which is why we still measure engine power in horsepower.
So, let's just reread that story through a modern lens. A chariot of fire becomes an advanced glowing vehicle. The horses of fire? Well, those aren't animals. They're a powerful propulsion system. And the whirlwind that took him up to heaven? That sounds an awful lot like the powerful thrust of an engine during liftoff, doesn't it?
And this idea isn't just about Elijah's chariot. Look at how clouds are described all over the Bible. In Exodus, a cloud leads the Israelites, intelligently searching for places to camp. In Isaiah, the Lord rides on a swift cloud. In Acts, a cloud receives Jesus, lifting him up. These don't sound like weather patterns. They sound like objects with purpose and capability.
But the most detailed and frankly,
The absolute strangest description of one of these things comes from the prophet Ezekiel. For a lot of people who subscribe to this technological interpretation, his vision is, well, it's the smoking gun.
I mean, Ezekiel's description in chapter 1 sounds unbelievably technical. He sees a whirlwind and a great cloud with raging fire. Sound familiar? Kind of like a modern rocket launch. He describes 4 figures with legs of burnished bronze, almost like metallic landing gear. They could move straight in any direction without turning, which suggests some kind of advanced maneuverability. And get this, their rims were full of eyes, which could easily be someone trying to describe lights or windows on a craft.
And then we get to this iconic, totally baffling description, a wheel in the middle of a wheel. I mean, how could an ancient person even come up with that? To a modern engineer, though, it sounds a whole lot like a description of a multi-axis gyroscope, an object that can spin and orient itself in any direction, seemingly defying normal physics.
So we've gone on this crazy journey from a movie title to a hymn to a poem and deep into ancient scripture, only to uncover this startlingly modern way of looking at these chariots and clouds, and it leaves us with one final pretty provocative thought.
The Bible itself in the book of Jeremiah offers this tantalizing clue. In the latter days, you will understand it perfectly. So the final question is this: are we living in those latter days? Is it possible that only now, with our modern understanding of technology, that we can finally decode what these ancient writers witnessed and tried so desperately to describe?